This is Modern Persian Food,
a culinary podcast for today's food enthusiast.
We talk about classic Persian flavors,
modern recipes,
and embracing culture and identity through food.
I'm Bita.
And I'm also Bita.
Welcome to our show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our show. Today, we're joined by Jian Ghomeshi, a broadcaster, writer, journalist, producer. Jian is the host of the podcast Roqe Media. Roqe explores the lives, culture, and identity of the Iranian diaspora. His guests have included artists, musicians, activists, and politicians. The podcast covers a wide range of topics, including the women's freedom movement in Iran. But today, we're giving Jian a breather from all that heavy lifting. We're going to have a fun chat about our favorite topic, food. Jian's a passionate foodie, and he's going to share some of his favorite Iranian dishes with us. Today, especially Ghormeh Sabzi. Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Jian. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you, Bita, and also Bita. It's actually really fun to be on your show. I listen, and one of the things I like is that the journey that you guys are on as people who didn't necessarily, it seems, didn't grow up in Iran. So you're like me, you're diaspora kids who are exploring our common culture, and that makes it even more fun to listen to.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Yes, we're fans of your podcast as well. I started listening more, during the whole Zan Zindagi Azadi movement. So thank you for your coverage on that. And you made us feel very hopeful. And I really appreciate that. And it's an honor to have you on the show with us.
Anything we can do to support the people in Iran is my mantra. So I don't know. Hopefully all of us can do whatever we can from outside of Iran.
Absolutely. And as we continue to share love and the Persian culture, and here we're doing that through our lens of food. So let's start talking about food. So you're a big fan of the iconic Persian dish.
To be honest, it's sort of, how many, what are you? You've done like 140 episodes or something, right?
Yep.
I mean, It's a bit embarrassing that what is going on? Why haven't you dealt with Ghormeh Sabzi yet?
Yes.
You're embarrassed for us? That's funny.
I'm outraged. How dare you?
It is an outrage.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, it is such an iconic dish that it's, we have to be able to do it justice.
That's right.
And it's hard for me to dedicate the amount of time that it deserves to really make a really authentic Ghormeh Sabzi. So we just have shied away from doing it because, it is just such a big topic that we want to kind of make sure that we cover it off right. And the shortcuts that we end up taking aren't bastardizing the recipe.
That's
and that we don't have hate mail coming from people telling us that we did it wrong. So
you can't open the set with a Beatles song. You have to start with some alternative songs, work your way up to Hey Jude.
Yeah, exactly.
I got it.
I mean, and to be honest, I love to just open the jar, and Bita uses the word bastardize all the time, but it just, you open the jar, and there are a couple brands that make Ghormeh Sabzi, and then you add what you want to it, and that's how I make it happen. But to make it the real way, I mean, let's be real. It takes a day, it takes 2 days. But what makes it so special, I think, and why people name it as one of kind of the top dishes, I think, is because the flavors are so unique and sour. I think the sour notes of Ghormeh Sabzi with the dried lime is really what kind of overshadows a lot of the dishes that make Persian food unique. So our listeners, they're not all Iranian. We've got some that are not Iranian at all, but that have found us that are somehow connected. And thank you all. But yeah, through marriage or half or a relation or a quarter. And so, they're riding the journey with us. And so I want to learn how to make it.
All right. Well, first, I can give you some rules around Ghormeh Sabzi. Should I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us everything that we all need to know about Ghormeh Sabzi, and also kind of your favorite ways to what you pair it with, and
of course,
all of that good stuff.
How did you learn how to make it? Aren't you like us? You grew up not in Iran?
Yeah, I did. I was born in London, England, and then I grew up in London and then Canada and then Toronto and New York. So, yes, not in Iran. But funny enough, I've always loved cooking, but I was very intimidated by Persian food. Anybody who knows an Iranian knows that they have these amazing, powerful, omnipotent mothers, and our mothers cook amazing food. Mine does. She's Azeri. She's originally from Tabriz, and she's this incredible cook. So, I was basically shamed, self-shaming, like how dare I try and make Persian food? And I was intimidated by it. And then a few years ago, I thought I'm going to dedicate some time to this. Why am I just making non-Persian food, since I pride myself on doing some cooking? And I did a combination of reading a bunch and watching videos on YouTube and asking my mother around these different Persian dishes. And this trio of information streams all disagreed with each other. Of course, my mother was like, no, that video is wrong, and the book said no. So I mean, you have to kind of aggregate the way to do things. And I should say, everything that I'm going to say, if I can issue a disclaimer, is entirely subjective. I mean, there are probably a gazillion ways to do this. I'm just giving you sort of my rules, but I think there's 4 important things to remember with Ghormeh Sabzi to start off. Okay,
and I'm taking notes here, by the way.
All right. Here we go, Bitas. Number one. So, first things first, Ghormeh Sabzi is, I believe, made to be made at home. Now, I'm going to start off once again. I hope I don't piss you guys off. I'm going to take issue with something that you've said on one of your podcasts, which is you had this episode, I think it was like episode 97 or 98, which is what to order when you go to a Persian restaurant. You remember that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So it was great as ever. You guys are always interesting and fun and insightful, but you basically said, oh, you could order kebabs or you could order khoresh. Now, I think when you go to a Persian restaurant, always order the kebabs.
Yeah.
And, judge the restaurant on the kebabs. And the reason is because if you go to a good Persian restaurant, it's delicious, it's savory, it's wonderful, but also it's very hard to make kebab at home in the same way, because a lot of us don't have the kind of big, powerful grills that in our house with the fire and everything that way we can make those kebabs. Whereas it's a lot more hit and miss with khoresh. So if you're taking a non-Iranian friend for the first time to a Persian restaurant, and you're saying, oh my God, you got to try fesenjoon, or you got to try khoresh de kadu, or you got to try Ghormeh Sabzi, you don't want something to turn up on that plate that is really far from what you hoped or expected or grew up with your mom making, And so I would always counsel people to shy away from ordering the khoresh, and particularly Ghormeh Sabzi, because it can be so hit and miss in a restaurant, and trust the home cooking. That's number one.
Okay, fair.
Number 2 is Ghormeh Sabzi is very aromatic. That's probably its best quality. Part of the deliciousness is the smells, and flavor and smell is so connected to each other, and that's what makes it this magnificent piece. On the other hand, be prepared for your house to smell like Ghormeh Sabzi, and your clothing,
and your
boyfriend, and pretty much everything around you. So you remember how you sometimes would go to one of your wonderful friends who's of South Asian background, an Indian house, and it smells like curry, and depending on whether you love or hate curry, you're going to determine how you feel about that house. I happen to love curry, so I would rush into that house, but you got to be ready with that, with the Ghormeh Sabzi. Other Iranians are going to come and know that you made the Ghormeh Sabzi. By the way, it's also a way to tell whether people have cooked it themselves, because if you turn up for dinner and the house doesn't smell like Ghormeh Sabzi, they got it from outside, right?
That's a good point. Gotcha.
Number 3, Ghormeh Sabzi is very controversial, because there are different versions of this. And even as I get into my recipe, there'll be listeners of yours going, no, that's not the right kind of bean to use. Or, and some people use some of the herbs, some people don't. So some people make it darker, more black. Some people make it more green. So suffice to say, there isn't one way, although all of us who make it think that our way is the way, obviously. And number 4, like many stews, and I don't remember hearing you guys cover this, but you probably have at some point. But this is universal for people who, as they know, if you make a good stew or a soup or something like that, it's usually, if not almost always, better the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So part of my process for making the Ghormeh Sabzi is sort of baking that in the sense that I know if I cook most of it the day before, I'm going to get to something better by dinner time the day of than if I do it all 2 hours before people arrive. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yep. It lets its flavors all melt together and simmer together. Yeah, for sure.
Kind of like chili. It's like chili.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I can give you the way to do it or the recipe if you want.
Yes, please.
All right.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then I'm interested to talk about the controversial parts too.
They'll probably come up during my recipe because you guys probably have made Ghormeh Sabzi, and you'll see how my way of doing it might be different or the same, or we'll see.
We've only done the shortcut ways, just so you know.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, the shortcut way, meaning like I opened a pre-made jar of Ghormeh Sabzi and I warmed it up. Like I've been there when it's all have been happening, but for me to be the one responsible for making it, I have not made Ghormeh Sabzi before from scratch.
once again, how dare you?
I know.
Just leave.
I know.
Just leave.
Why not just settle for KFC?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do love KFC too. I mean, I think as a Persian, you kind of have to love Kentucky Fried Chicken.
It's true.
But I've been intimidated. It seems like a lot, even if when you take the shortcuts. Yeah. So I'm here to be enlightened.
Well, I love you for saying I appreciate you. That's a great candor because it is in fact a laborious process. Like if you want to, and I think I've heard you guys say this before, if you want to try something and it's your first time, this is a long way to go to try it if you want to cook it yourself. So you might want to go find it somewhere else or something. Although part of the controversy that I'm talking about is that I'm really zero tolerance on the don't make it all yourself because I really think it makes a difference. There's two quick routes to Ghormeh Sabzi. One of them is what you guys are talking about in terms of you can buy basically the herb mixture already done either in a jar or in some package or something like that, and you kind of add that to the meat and there you go. The other way is you buy all the herbs dry. You buy dried herbs and then you kind of put them in some water to help them come out, but you basically don't do that fresh herb culling and cutting and all of that yourself. I think, both of those methods are definitely time savers, but they really compromise the majestic nature of the aroma and taste that you're going to end up with. So,
Okay.
yes, part of my prescription is to do this all yourself from the get-go.
And it's probably the similar, because Bita June and I, we have made Roqe Sabzi and ashe from scratch. And that's kind of the same sort of, if you start with the fresh herbs, the whole house is going to smell like heaven. And that's probably the same deal.
100%. 100%. Actually, if you've made the Roqe Sabzi, then, you're halfway there to a certain extent.
Totally, yeah.
There's two big steps to Ghormeh Sabzi. One is the herbs and the other is the meat and the stew. And then you're sort of putting them together. And, one of the beautiful things about Ghormeh Sabzi is that it is, it's even called, and sometimes there's no sort of English word for Ghormeh Sabzi, but some people call it herb stew because it is so rich in herbs. And for a culture or a cuisine that can often be stereotyped as sort of just being kebab and rice,
right?
Even though we love our kebab and rice, of course, this is, to me, what makes Persian cuisine so rich. This combination, this collusion of herbs, that are just so wonderful. So you're going to start off with the herbs because this is a time-consuming part. When you guys were talking about having me on your great program, and I said, well, I do a Ghormeh Sabzi, but it takes me a couple of days. This is part of where I was going with this. First of all, you have to get the herbs. And this isn't always easy. The herbs you're going to try to find are parsley, green onions. You can probably get spinach, cilantro, and chives, and then this is the important one, fenugreek. Now, depending on where you live, these things may be more challenging than not to get, especially the fenugreek. But if you can find them, all of them, if you can get them all fresh, it's the best case scenario. And you're buying a lot, or you're finding or procuring, however you get them, a lot. You need a lot of herbs.
You're right, because that's basically what goes in cuckoo.
It's the entire thing. It's herb, exactly. So I cannot overstate how many herbs you need because, as you guys know, and this is the heartbreaking part, no matter how big the pile is on your kitchen counter, once you start frying it, it turns into this tiny little, so it disappears, so you really need a lot. So you take the green onions, you take the parsley, you take the cilantro, you take the spinach, you take the fenugreek, and you chop it up. And this is going to be a time-consuming process. And depending on how particular you are, if you don't like the stems of the cilantro, then you got to pick the leaves off and chop those off, etc. But you're basically going to create a mound of green herbs.
And this is the most labor-intensive part, would you say?
This is extremely labor-intensive.
You have to actually wash them and dry them all, which actually takes forever.
Yes.
The getting and kind of washing and drying all of the herbs before you even get to chopping it, it's still it takes a lot of time to do that.
Yeah. If you don't like the process and or the adventure of cooking, this is not for you.
Right. You're right.
Also, and this is maybe important, as you make your mound of herbs, keep the fenugreek separate. The fenugreek is an important piece of Ghormeh Sabzi, but it needs to be handled carefully because it can change the tone and the texture and the taste of your stew. So you want to keep that separate, and I'll tell you why in a second. So you're going to cut up all these herbs, and then you're basically going to fry them, and you fry them in oil. And you can, at this point, add a little bit of turmeric, can add some saffron. You're obviously going to add a little bit of salt and pepper if you want. I mean, these things are sort of de facto rules for any Persian dish, it seems. If you're according to my mother anyway, you kind of just putting in turmeric and saffron and everything. So why not? You can put them in these. So you fry them up, add the fenugreek a little later. And do not add too much fenugreek, because fenugreek is part of the magic of the taste, but it also can be quite overpowering. And if it's cooked too much, it can be that bitter taste that you don't want. You don't want it to be too, not to mention if you over fry it, they can get really black. So you have to kind of find that sweet spot where it's still kind of green looking, healthy, and not too much fenugreek. But then you have this mound of cooked herbs. That's going to take you, depending on how long it takes you to cut up and all of that, that's going to take you a few hours maybe, or 2 or 3 hours or something. Once you do that, you leave that aside. So now you've got your herb portion is done. And that can basically sit there overnight. It's not going to go bad, and it's going to add to the taste, as I say, if it's on the day after. Now, so that's on one side. The next big step is the meat and the beans that go with the meat and the limes.
Hi, friends. We have a small ask for you.
We'd love it if you could pass this episode along to a friend, a cousin, or anyone you think would benefit from hearing from us.
Thank you. So out of those herbs that you listed, I did not hear some herbs that I thought maybe could go in there. What about dill, mint, or leek? Are those typically not in your version of Ghormeh Sabzi?
No.
Are they not in Ghormeh Sabzi?
Well, I don't want to say they're not in the sense that for somebody they may be, but I've never heard
your
of.
Recipe doesn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't. And dill's those are overpowering herbs, so you have to be careful. No, I don't think they're part of the roster.
Okay, and I'm assuming that because there's so much, you have to do this kind of in batches in the big pot.
No, the herbs you need like a big pan or a wok or something like that. That yes, but then you put some aside and do some more. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, the more the merrier when it comes to Ghormeh Sabzi. Depending on how many people you're cooking for, if you're making dinner for 8 or 10 people, you need a lot of herbs. This is the centerpiece, even though it's ostensibly a meat dish. The centerpiece is the herbs. So, and you don't want it to be too watery. The other thing about those ready-made Ghormeh Sabzis is I find that they can be kind of watery, like the herbs are chopped up really, really fine, or they've been sitting there long enough that it's almost like it ends up being more like a fesenjoon, but with a Ghormeh Sabzi taste. And you really should be able to taste or see that you've got a number of herbs in your stew,
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to deal with the frozen because of the water issue too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, ready to go to meat.
Next step on the meat side. And while you're doing the herbs, you could have been soaking your beans. Now, Ghormeh Sabzi includes beans, and depending on whose recipe you subscribe to, they may be kidney beans. I guess being my mother's son, and I'm not sure if this is a Tabrizi thing or a Turkish thing. I'm not sure. Somebody will have to correct us or correct me based on hearing this. But my mom always taught me that we use the sort of, I think they're called navy beans or the black-eyed beans.
Yeah.
They're white and they have the little black eye,
Yeah, the black-eyed peas. Mm-hmm. I love those.
I think traditionally, at least most of them I've ever seen have kidney beans.
Yes.
But I've seen it with black-eyed peas too, as a good alternative.
Yeah, and it's delicious with that.
They look cool either way, It kind of adds to the kidney beans, add a nice kind of browny red look, and the white is nice amongst the green stew as well. So either way, you're going to need to soak the beans, and if it's the navy beans that I'm talking about, you need to soak them for a few hours.
So you're using dry beans. You're not opening up a can, even on your beans.
Correct. No, there's no cans involved here. Come on.
We're getting the authentic recipe, classic. There's no shortcuts in this version.
You're going to have to post your video of this. I don't know if I believe you.
Oh, yeah. But then I have to worry about my hair and.
Oh, God.
So soak the beans. This stuff is pretty basic. You chop up some onions. I like to use garlic because I put garlic in everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So put some garlic with some oil. You fry up the onions and garlic. You can add some, again, here are some turmeric and saffron. This all adds to the color. So then you add your meat. Now, I use beef, so like a stewing beef or, beef chunks. But obviously, Ghormeh Sabzi can also be made with lamb. And I have a funny story about this because you guys were talking about you wanted to do at some point juja kebab, something to do with chicken. And through most of my 20s, I was vegetarian. I was even vegan for a while. So there was no chance. It kind of cut me out of a lot of Persian food that is meat oriented. And then I sort of made my way back into meat by eating chicken. And for the time when I was eating chicken and I wasn't eating beef or red meat, my mom started making Ghormeh Sabzi with chicken, which of course was still delicious. I mean, you can put any kind of meat in there, but it is kind of, I guess, on some levels heretical. I remember I was in Los Angeles and I went to this Persian restaurant, and it turns out it was the owner. A guy came over and said, and he was sort of old school Iranian, like, "What do you want?" And I said, "Yeah, the Ghormeh Sabzi. Do you make Ghormeh Sabzi with jujia, like with chicken?" And the look on his face, and he said, "Chicken. I never heard of this in my whole life." He was like
Oh my
extremely, it was like soup Nazi. Like it was like, get out of my restaurant,
He was so offended.
And I was like, "I'm so sorry. Don't
ruin the dish." We kind of talk about how, we give liberty to our listeners to use whatever kind of protein that they want. I mean, and Ghormeh Sabzi has beans in it, so that has some sort of protein. But yeah, I would say that the classic versions, lamb or beef, but then the new kind of innovative ways, chicken. Bita Jun puts tofu in hers. I've heard mushrooms too, as well, kind of like for like a little meat substitute.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you almost got nixed from that restaurant, huh?
He never warmed up to me after that, for sure.
Yeah.
No amount of tipping or, yeah. So your meat of choice, you put it in there with we're sauteing. We got the onions, the garlic, we got the turmeric, we got the saffron, we got some oil. Obviously, we're frying up the meat. And as you know, beef takes a while in contrast to chicken, actually. You want to make sure the meat is tender. You don't want to get it all the way cooked. You're sort of searing it because you're going to add water and turn this into a stew. But you want to pretty much cook it. And I believe you should put the navy beans, those beans you've been soaking, in while you're still frying. So after a while of frying up the meat, feel free to add the beans. The meat and the beans will both absorb the flavor of each other, and you're adding them to the turmeric and saffron. So you're making a sort of a happy marriage of all of these things. Once you feel like the meat is pretty cooked, that's when you add the water, and you want to basically submerge. If you're doing this all in a pot anyway, you just keep it in the same pot. You make sure the water's covering everything. And now you're basically boiling this. And it's at this point that you're going to add all of the fruits of your labor, all of those herbs to this stew, to this great concoction in the pot. And this is where there's a couple of important additions here. One of them being Persian limes, limu amuni, we call them in Persian, which is a dried lime. Mm-hmm. Another thing that isn't always easy to get. I'm guessing if you're, say, in California, like you guys in the Bay Area or LA, you're not going to have any trouble finding these. But if you're somewhere in the Midwest or you're somewhere in the outback in Australia listening to this, you might have to find them somehow. And funny enough, you know what I discovered? You can order dried limes, like Persian limes, on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah, on Amazon, and also some of our other, we've had sponsors who include limu amani in their roster of products. So yeah, definitely online is a great source to get limu amani or kind of any of those ingredients that aren't easy to come by.
And if you can't, which hopefully you can get them, if you cannot, Maybe lemon juice, lime juice. I mean, if you have to.
I just put lemon juice.
You should add lemon juice anyway.
Yeah.
You can add lemon juice anyway. It cuts some of the bitterness. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize you could add some too. Add lemon juice. Oh, that's a
Oh
good
yeah.
idea.
Oh yeah. That's a final step. That's a final step. But
Okay.
but the Persian limes are such a big part of the look and the taste and the yeah. So you poke some holes in them, as you know, before you add them to the water, and then put them in the water. And now you're basically, you're simmering, you're boiling all of this stew for anywhere between. Well, it depends on. I mean, assuming you've cooked everything the way we talked about. At this point, you're 45 minutes or less away from your Ghormeh Sabzi, and it shouldn't be. You should be careful not to add too much water because there's nothing worse than a very watery Ghormeh Sabzi. It should be kind of a thick and rich stew. Now, here's the final controversial part, which I've debated with my mother over the years because I happen to just be really into spicy food. I like things spicy.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. I can't wait for what you're about to say. I think I know what you're going to say.
And as you guys will know, Persian food isn't really spicy.
No.
It's unfortunately. So we have to kind of improvise.
It's well spiced. We got that from Modern Persian Kitchen. It's not spicy, it's well spiced.
Well said. That's very true. That's very true. But in terms of the heat, we don't always bring the heat in terms of that kind of spice, those peppers, etc. So along the way, I like to make a Ghormeh Sabzi atoned, like a spicy Ghormeh Sabzi, which is a little shocking for some people at first. They're like, this is not supposed to be spicy. You have made this as spicy, but but for
Babajan, what are you doing? What are you doing?
But I really love making a spicy Ghormeh Sabzi. So early on in the process, even with the herbs, I add a little bit of cayenne. I put some dried chili peppers,
chili flakes,
flakes in, and I take chilies, like chili peppers, actually the red chili peppers, and cut them up a little bit and put them in the final mix because also they look really pretty. So now you got the green, you got the white beans, you got the meat, you got the limu amuni, and you got little chili there as well. So
how cute!
I do like the chili flakes. I'll take that.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that sounds delicious. Yeah, I want to learn a little bit more about spicy Persian food. I believe that more southern Iran has more spicy, so I'm on the lookout for a guest that can help us with that. So if anyone is listening and can enlighten us, let me know. But that sounds delicious. I love it. And it's such a rich dish. I appreciate the sour notes for sure, but then a little bit of spice. I think that makes it really interesting.
But just as a sidebar, I have to say I was really nervous to a certain extent about this because you guys are this is like a food podcast that you have actual cooks and chefs and experts on, and so I really don't know what I'm doing. I mean, this is just like what I've learned to do, and so I appreciate you humoring me with hearing my Ghormeh Sabzi.
Yeah, are you kidding me?
If you can't beat a join a. That's what I always say.
Yeah. And I think that it just kind of shows their perspective that even if you're not classically trained in making Persian food, that you can do it, and that there are these variations. Not only are there variations geographically from northern Iran versus southern Iran, or different parts of Iran having different flavors and ingredients in them. And, in this example, the choice of beans that are used. But it just shows that there can be variations from home to home, family to family. And us living outside of Iran, we all have our different versions that we make of some of the classic Persian dishes.
I mean, that's my big dream, is everyone to be able to taste Persian food because it's so freaking delicious.
Yeah. Well, that said, I mean, I should also say that I think if you do the work, in terms of all these herbs I'm talking about, the cutting up, the getting all the ingredients, the trying to do it quote unquote authentically, it is kind of hard to miss. I mean, it's a delicious dish. People can kind of taste all that's gone into it. And I remember growing up, my mom, we were growing up in a suburb of Toronto, and I would bring over my non-Iranian friends, and she would have something like Ghormeh Sabzi, and then she would make a lasagna as well or something, in case. And I'd be like, Mom, what are you making the lasagna for? She, well, they may not like this taste, And of course, every kid loved it, right? I mean, it's really hard to dislike things like the tastes may be different at first, but something like Ghormeh Sabzi or Fesenjun, I really believe that made well, anybody's going to love it. You sort of can't miss. There's all that goodness, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, when you have all those amazing ingredients cooking together, you're for sure going to end up with a delicious dish.
Yeah, and it's very on brand for you, Jian.
How so?
You know, you're an authentic guy. You're an authentic guy. Roqe.
That's right. That's right.
Roqe, yes.
Yeah.
You know, you just said like the story about growing up and your mom making the lasagna that like struck like an internal like little chord. It just made me feel so fuzzy inside. I like completely picture that because like my mom would like make like a lasagna. And it's funny because a lasagna is not a very traditional lasagna. It's like a Persian style lasagna, you know? It's so delicious. Yeah, exactly. Like how we kind of talk about macaroni and the Persian version of it. But the lasagna with like the kind of the Persian flavors. And then you get a real Italian coming through and they're like, what is this? Like, this isn't lasagna. And I was like, no, this is like Persian lasagna.
Right.
It has turmeric in it. And
if I can actually go the extra step in terms of the psychological and cultural dimensions of this, depending on your age, like, you know, I was a kid in the 80s. We go way back, right? So in the backdrop of the revolution and the hostage crisis and all that, it wasn't that popular to be an Iranian. So my parents would worry about that. Whereas the kids I was actually coming up with, you know, they would love Persian food. So they would come to the house, ironically, you know, like I played in a band for a long time. The guys in the band just loved everything Persian. None of them were Iranian, but they just loved it, you know? And so they would come over to my parents' house thinking that they're going to get Persian food. And my mom would say, okay, well, now that Mike and David, now that you're here and Murray, I've made a roast beef, you know, and they'd be kind of like, oh, we were here for the, you know, the Khoreste Badem June, you know? So
for the Lubia polo.
There was a sort of, a cultural intimidation that, you know, was like, well, what if they don't like us? We're ethnic, you know? And I think thankfully with the growth of the Persian diaspora, especially in big urban centers like Toronto or San Francisco, et cetera, that we've passed that point. I think Persians now know that if somebody comes over for dinner, they can feed them Persian food and with pride, you know?
For sure.
And you know what? I think it even goes even more beyond that I think that the receptivity of people nowadays, people are more accepting. I feel at least the people that I surround myself with are more accepting and want to learn about different cultures, want to experience the foods of different countries in a way that I feel like maybe growing up, I just maybe wasn't exposed to as much. But I feel like as time goes on, that stuff changes as well.
Yeah, totally.
Thank goodness. I was the same era as you. Those were rough days. It's like, oh my gosh, my house smells different, weird, you know.
Smells like
my
onions.
Friends are coming over. I just want to have a hamburger, spaghetti.
Hamburger, yeah.
Well, Jian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. This was a lot of fun, not only to learn how to make Ghormeh Sabzi and kind of maybe boosted our confidence a little bit about being able to make it, but it was really great kind of connecting from a cultural standpoint and kind of sharing some of those similar experiences growing up, you know, in the diaspora, growing up outside of Iran. So thank you so much for all of that.
Thank you. What a pleasure it was. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, anything new projects you're working on, where can our listeners find you?
Well, I would love your listeners to check out Roqe, which can be found we're on all the podcast platforms and YouTube and Instagram, et cetera, as well. But Roqe is ROQE. So roqemedia.com is our website. And we actually, as part and parcel of all that, we do a regular podcasts and stuff, but we also have the Contemporary History of Iran, this kind of history series that we did and some other goodies there. So I hope people will check it out.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great. We'll link to all of that in our show notes. And thanks again for your time today.
Thanks, Beats.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Modern Persian Food Podcast with Bita and Bita. Thanks for spending time with us. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider telling a friend or giving us a good rating. You can subscribe to our show for free on your favorite podcasting app or find us online at modernpersianfood.com or on Instagram for the recipes and information we talked about today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and see you next time.